The Johnson family, a cherished and adventurous group of 5, set out on their annual journey to the vibrant jungles of South America, capturing joyful moments in photos along the way. Then, without warning, they disappeared. No calls, no updates, no trace. For 5 years, the mystery haunted everyone who knew them, until one day, Sylvie Johnson, the youngest member of the family, reappeared. She was alone, disheveled, and carrying a story so extraordinary it would rewrite everything we thought we knew. The Johnson family was the kind of family everyone admired. Robert and Emily Johnson were both in their mid-40s. They were loving parents with a shared passion for exploring the world. Their 3 children, Luke, 17, Mia, 12, and Sylvie, 8, grew up surrounded by tales of their parents' travels. Every year, the Johnsons took a holiday trip to a new destination. In 2016, they planned an ambitious journey to South America to explore the pristine beauty of the Amazon rainforest. The family's excitement was evident in the weeks leading up to the trip. Social media posts showed snapshots of their preparations. Robert poring over maps, Emily packing supplies, and the children grinning as they tried on hiking boots. The Johnsons intended to document their adventure with daily updates, sharing their experiences with friends and extended family back home. In the first few days of their journey, everything seemed to go perfectly. They shared stunning photos of vibrant parrots, towering trees, and boat rides along winding rivers. Their captions were filled with awe and excitement. "Nature like nothing we've ever seen," read one, accompanied by a photo of Luke standing next to a massive tree. Then, without warning, the updates stopped. At first, no one was alarmed. Spotty internet and cell service were expected in such a remote area, but as hours turned into days, concern began to mount. The Johnsons had promised to check in daily, and their silence was out of character. By the end of the week, their extended family contacted authorities and reported them missing. The search for the Johnsons began with urgency. Local authorities organized search teams to comb the area where they were last seen. Helicopters scanned the dense rainforest from above. Boats navigated the rivers in hopes of finding their trail. The U.S. Embassy in Brazil became involved and coordinated with local officials to expand the efforts. Days became weeks, and hope dwindled with each passing moment. The jungle was vast and unyielding, seemingly swallowing every lead. The family's last known location was a small eco-lodge near the border of a protected area. Witnesses there recalled the Johnsons leaving on a guided tour, but did not remember their return. Even the guide, a seasoned local, was nowhere to be found. Over time, months turned into years, and the search efforts came to an end. The dense and unyielding rainforest, combined with the absence of concrete clues, left investigators with few options. Requests to continue the search were met with understanding yet resigned replies. Both authorities and locals concluded that the Johnson family had most likely fallen victim to the harsh jungle. Their disappearance became one of the countless unsolved enigmas of the Amazon. It was a routine morning at the American Embassy in Manaus, Brazil, 5 years after the Johnson family's disappearance, when an officer received a call from a local official. A young girl, disheveled and malnourished, had appeared at a remote outpost near the jungle. She was around 13, spoke halting English, and claimed her name was Sylvie Johnson. The news stunned the embassy staff. Sylvie Johnson, presumed dead along with her family for 5 years, was alive. Sylvie was brought to the embassy. Her clothes were ragged, and her hair had been crudely cut. Embassy workers immediately confirmed her identity through old photos and records. Sylvie, the youngest of the Johnson family, was the only one who had resurfaced. The mystery surrounding her survival was deeply perplexing. News of Sylvie's return spread rapidly. It soon reached her relatives in the United States, prompting her older cousin, Grace, and her grandfather, Mark Johnson, to board the next flight to Brazil. When they arrived at the embassy, they barely recognized the girl who stood before them. Sylvie was no longer the giggling 8-year-old they remembered. Her face was gaunt, her eyes were hollow, and her movements were cautious, as if she were bracing for something unseen. But when she saw her grandfather, her expression softened. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Grandpa," she whispered. She threw herself into his arms and clung tightly, as though afraid he might vanish too. Despite her halting speech, Sylvie managed to convey glimpses of her ordeal. She mentioned strangers who had helped her and spoke of her family in vague terms, referring to them in the present tense. "They're still there, but sick," she said at one point. I came for help." Her words sent chills through Mark and Grace. Could the rest of the Johnson family still be alive? If so, what condition were they in, and where had they been all these years? Sylvie rested that night, but Mark and Grace stayed up discussing what little they had learned. The fragments Sylvie had shared painted a picture of survival against unimaginable odds, but the gaps in her shocking story left them with more questions than answers. The sun was barely rising when Sylvie, Grace, and Mark began their journey deep into the South American jungle. They set out from a small riverside village, accompanied by a local guide with a machete in hand. Sylvie walked ahead of them. Her steps were assured, as if the dense, labyrinthine forest was an old friend. Grace and Mark struggled to keep up, their steps labored and uneven. The oppressive humidity clung to their skin, making every movement feel heavier. Sylvie, however, moved as if untouched by the stifling air. Her small frame glided effortlessly through the dense undergrowth. Her feet instinctively followed hidden paths, as though she had traveled them countless times before. The deeper they went, the more they encountered signs of human struggle. Torn pieces of fabric dangled from low-hanging branches. A rusted metal pot lay half-buried in the underbrush. Grace picked it up. "This was theirs," she said quietly, glancing at Mark. "They were here." Sylvie didn't respond. She seemed intent on leading them somewhere, though she hadn't yet said where. As they pressed on, the forest grew darker. The canopy above thickened until sunlight barely pierced through. The air felt heavier, and the sounds of wildlife were louder and more foreboding. By nightfall, they reached a small clearing and prepared to set up camp. Mark attempted to sleep, but his thoughts refused to quiet. How had Sylvie managed to survive in this unforgiving place for so long? What had become of the rest of the family? Grace was equally restless. At one point, Sylvie stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the clearing. Grace followed. Sylvie's gaze was fixed on the darkness beyond. "We're close," she said. "They're waiting." As the first light of dawn pierced through the canopy, Sylvie led Grace, Mark, and their guide deeper into the jungle. The dense foliage gave way to a narrow trail that twisted and turned. Then, without warning, she stopped and pointed ahead. "There," she whispered. Grace and Mark peered through the underbrush and saw a small village in a clearing. "Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much." Simple huts, made of woven leaves and wood, stood in a circle around a communal fire pit. Smoke curled lazily into the sky. It was a place frozen in time, untouched by modern civilization. As they stepped into the village, its inhabitants emerged from their huts to observe the newcomers. Sylvie greeted them confidently, using gestures and speaking in a dialect unfamiliar to Grace and Mark. Her natural ease with the villagers left them both astonished. The moment they saw the Johnson family, it was as if time stopped. Robert and Emily sat outside one of the huts. They were nearly unrecognizable, thin, with weathered skin. Luke and Mia were nearby. Their conditions were similar, fragile and weakened. The sight brought tears to Mark's eyes. "Emily! Robert!" he called out. Robert looked up, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Mark!" he croaked. Grace ran to embrace Mia and Luke. The reunion was bittersweet. Joy mingled with the stark reality of their condition. Sylvie stood nearby, watching silently as the family reconnected. As the initial shock subsided, Mark and Grace began to take in their surroundings. The village was small and isolated. Its people lived off the land with remarkable ingenuity. They farmed modest plots of vegetables, fished in nearby streams, and foraged for medicinal herbs. Sylvie explained in hesitant English that years ago, the villagers had discovered the Johnson family lost and on the brink of death. They had taken them in, providing care and nursing them back to health. "They saved us," Robert added. "Without them, we wouldn't have made it." But it was clear that the family's health had deteriorated. Mark noticed Robert struggling to breathe, and Emily coughing persistently. Luke and Mia looked pale and lethargic. The villagers, too, showed signs of illness. They had sunken eyes, labored movements, and rashes on their skin. "What's happening here?" Grace asked. Sylvie explained that a mysterious sickness had spread through the village months ago. It affected everyone, including her family. The villagers had done their best to treat it with traditional remedies, but their isolation left them without access to modern medicine. "That's why I left," Sylvie said softly. I had to find help." Mark's heart sank. It was clear that the situation was dire. The family's survival depended on immediate medical aid, but the village's remote location posed a significant challenge. He and Grace discussed their options with the Johnsons and the village elders, who were reluctant to expose their community to outsiders. "They're afraid," Emily said. "They've lived here for generations, hidden from the world. They don't trust what they don't know." The discussion continued late into the evening, with Sylvie acting as a bridge between the two worlds. Her fluency in the villagers' language and her deep connection to their customs earned their trust. Eventually, the elders agreed to allow limited outside assistance. That evening, as the fire crackled and the jungle's sounds intensified in the encroaching darkness, Sylvie sat with Grace and Mark near one of the huts. Her family remained inside, too frail to join them by the fire. With a soft and encouraging tone, Grace urged Sylvie to share her story. We got lost," Sylvie said simply. "The guide took us on a new path, one he said was shorter, but something went wrong. A storm came. The rivers swelled, the jungle closed in around us. The guide," Sylvie explained, "had panicked. He led the family deeper into the wilderness in an attempt to find shelter. Days turned into weeks as their food supplies dwindled and their spirits weakened. They lost track of time and direction. Their maps were rendered useless by the unrelenting landscape." "We were scared," Sylvie said, "but Mom and Dad kept saying we'd find a way out." Then came the breaking point. One night, the guide vanished. Whether he abandoned them or succumbed to the jungle, Sylvie never knew. Alone and desperate, the Johnson family pushed forward until they stumbled upon the village. "They found us," Sylvie said. "The villagers, they didn't speak our language, but they helped. They gave us food, water, and shelter." Initially, the Johnsons were cautious and uncertain about the tribe's intentions. However, as time went on, they came to understand that the villagers posed no threat. In truth, they had been the ones to save the family's lives. The Johnsons had no choice but to adapt. They learned the tribe's ways of survival, fishing with nets woven from vines, foraging for edible plants, and using natural remedies to treat illnesses. "It wasn't easy," Sylvie said. "Dad hurt his leg. Mom got sick from the water at first, but we learned. We had to." Years passed. Sylvie's once fluent English faded as she adopted the tribe's language. Luke and Mia became adept at climbing trees and catching fish. Emily and Robert contributed to the community. They helped with farming and gathering firewood. Though they longed to return home, the Johnsons grew to accept their new life. They believed rescue was impossible. Then the sickness came. Sylvie described how the illness swept through the village. Fever, coughing, and fatigue claimed even the strongest members of the tribe. The Johnsons, too, fell victim to the disease. Sylvie's mother grew weak. Her energy faded with each passing day. Luke and Mia struggled to stand, and Robert's breathing became labored. "I couldn't watch them get worse," Sylvie said. "I knew I had to do something." Despite the villagers' objections, Sylvie made the difficult decision to leave in search of help. For weeks, she prepared meticulously, collecting supplies and committing to memory the faint trails that linked the village to the outside world. "I wasn't sure if I would make it," she admitted, "but I couldn't just stay and do nothing." As the firelight flickered in the village, Luke stepped out of his tent and inched closer to Grace and Mark. He glanced at Sylvie, who gave him a subtle nod. He took a deep breath, then spoke in a hushed tone. "There's something Sylvie didn't tell you," Luke said. "The illness, it's not natural. It's caused by something in the water." Grace and Mark exchanged worried glances. Luke paused, collecting his thoughts. While Sylvie was looking for help, she found signs of mining upstream, he continued. "There were men, machines, and barrels of chemicals near the river. They've been dumping waste into the water we drink and use every day." Sylvie reached into her bag and pulled out a small object, a rusted metal tag with an unfamiliar logo. "I found this near their site," she said. "The river feeds into the village. It's poisoning everyone. Our family, the villagers, even the land." In the days following the shocking revelation, Grace and Mark acted swiftly. With the trust of the village elders, they contacted local authorities and international aid organizations to bring immediate medical assistance to the remote jungle community. Doctors arrived by helicopter, bringing vaccines, clean water supplies, and medicines to combat the illnesses that had ravaged the village. Mark spearheaded efforts to alert environmental watchdog groups about the illegal mining operations Sylvie had uncovered. Photos of the rusted metal tag and the polluted river were sent to global media outlets. The story, framed as a harrowing tale of survival, quickly gained international traction. Environmental activists, human rights organizations, and journalists descended upon the region to shine a light on the devastating impact of exploitation in remote, vulnerable communities. Did you enjoy this story? Would you have risked your life to save your family as Sylvie did? Could you survive in a wild tribe? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Even in the darkest times, courage and determination have the power to save us. Thank you so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.